Hey, it's Dr. Bob coming to you here from the LaBrea Tar Pits in LaBrea, California. The LaBrea Tar Pits give us a really unique perspective because they give us a view on several different geological events that are going on, and they all relate to the flood and the events and the conditions that happened afterwards. First off, we start with the fact that there's all this tar coming up out of the ground. So we know that there has been the creation of these petroleum products. Petroleum products are unique because they contain porphyrins. Now, porphyrins exist in hemoglobin and in chlorophyll, and so we know they have a biological origin, and they are what is responsible for the petroleum formation. And in particular, they require these conditions to allow this biological material to turn into petroleum products. So whether it's coal or oil or tar in this case. And what those conditions are is it needs to be a rapid burial of a lot of biological material in an impervious base and then covered with sediments. And in spite of what many people have been told, they do not require a lot of heat. And in fact, if coal experiences a lot of heat, the porphyrins will break down. And so we know that most of this has not been exposed to great deals of heat. Now, if you inject water and additional heat, then you're going to get oil products that come out of it instead. But what we have here is these petroleum products seeping up out of the ground. So we see that as a result of Noah's flood, we have all of this biological material, these huge forests and biological material that's then encapsulated in these sediment layers. It's unique because when we look at coal and at oil, rather than being the byproduct of swamps or peat that we typically hear about, they exhibit characteristics which indicate that they're more likely from rainforest type materials. Now, we know in the Bible that it talks about that there was this great separation during the creation, that God separated the land from the waters. Okay, so we typically talk about it in terms of one large landmass, and that landmass being a very tropical type environment with a lot of opportunity for green materials, that produce chlorophyll, lots of plants and trees, grasses and things to grow. Now, that's important because currently, if we look at it, all the biological material that's on the earth right now, the estimates are that if it were converted to petroleum products, it would only account for about 30% of the coal and petroleum products that we find on the earth today. So there's not enough green material on the earth right now to generate all the petroleum products that we see. So it was a significantly larger amount of biomass that was used to form all of these petroleum products that we see. And of course, as the waters of the flood come over and strip all of these biological materials off of the planets and encapsulate them, we also know that that's not the result then of forests, because what we don't see in these petroleum beds are root systems. Typically, they are laid on top of clay or impervious materials, so not soil and not good growing materials. So we know that this was deposited as a result of a catastrophic event. So that's our first phase of LaBrea, is the formation of all these petroleum products. Now, the stories for years, these pits were discovered back in the 1830s, and originally the ranchers and the farmers that had them, they just assumed that these were tar pits that would bubble up, and that the bones that they would find associated with them were the result of coyotes or something like that. We now know there's over 230 species of animals that are found in these tar pits, and that they are not the animals that we typically see running around today, although you do find insects and some small mammals that are very reminiscent of animals that we see now. But you also see saber-toothed cats and camels. When was the last time you saw a camel in Southern California that wasn't in a zoo? We see mastodons, and we see mammoths and all these large mammals. In addition to some humans and other animals that are found associated with these tar pits. But originally, the farmers and the ranchers that found them thought that they were just local animals. But in the process of looking at them for extraction of oil products, they started discovering these saber-toothed teeth and saber-toothed skulls, and realizing these aren't the kind of animals we're seeing running around in Southern California today. And so as they began to excavate, they found that they were actually animals that existed not too long after the flood, towards the end of the ice age that followed the flood. That this would have been an area that these type of animals would have been fairly prolific. In addition to that, we see that these original pits, the assumption always was that these animals thought that it was water and they fell in. Doesn't really jive with the evidence, because what we tend to see are these bones in tangled messes, reminiscent of what we see in places like Montana or Wyoming when we have flows of water that are coming through and compacting a group of animals together. So you see damage to the bones. You see that they are in actually bone balls, where you have lots and lots of different animals' bones all intermixed together. Not to mention the fact that the first pit, pit 36 that was excavated, its opening was only 2 feet by 4 feet and was only 11 feet deep. So it's hard to imagine great mastodons and mammoths falling in this 2 by 4 foot little hole. So we know that something else happened. So what seems to be a better explanation for the presence of all of these bones is that in the flood events that occurred after the Great Flood, so as the ice age, the glaciers begin to melt and they form these great inland seas, which then overtop and break through and cause these massive flows of water, cutting canyons and depositing large amounts of sediment after the flood, that those were most likely the kind of events that would have happened that then trapped these animals in these valleys and gathered them together and deposited them into these bone deposits. Happened multiple times, as you would have glacier waters melting, forming these great inland seas, and then those breaking through, causing these flood events. Not to mention the fact, as we're going to talk about in a minute, that this is an area of great seismic activity. So you're going to see the earth moving around after the flood in this great cataclysmic period of time after the fountains of the deep open up and start the shifting of the plates. You're going to start seeing earthquakes, which then redirect the flow of rivers and lakes and things. And so you have a lot of events going on that are causing these post-flood events. Things like what we see in Missoula and places like that. So we would have had these bones being deposited, and then and we also previously, during the flood, it had all this biological material encapsulated, which is then forming these petroleum products. And because again of this earthquake activity, you're going to have fractures in the earth which cause those petroleum products to be able to seep into the deposits that then contain the bone beds. So we're having two separate events that are connected by another event, the seismic activity. And so what we would have is these petroleum products coming into the bones, and as opposed to being permineralized like we see with a lot of other fossils, what you see here are these that are preserved in these petroleum products in an oxygen deprived environment. Okay, so you're going to have now these bones encapsulated in this oil and tar and seeping up through. What many people don't realize is long before California was known for its beaches and its movies, it was known for oil. Oil was the real driving economic force in Southern California. And so there's a lot of oil under the ground, a lot of oil that sits off the coast. And it's all encapsulated in these layers of sediment built on top of these deposits, these impervious deposits of clay and things that then allow these biological materials to then become the petroleum products that we see today. So what you see here in LaBrea is a combination of a number of geological and biblical events coming together at once. You see the Great Flood, you see the fountains of the Great Deep opening and the lands beginning to shift, and you see the period after the flood when there's still great cataclysms in the world as a result of the earth trying to recover from this great trauma that was the flood. So when we look at this, instead of seeing animals slipping into the tar and everything else, just think about the fact that these are all byproducts of the biblical account and of the global flood. And so one more indication that it's okay to believe. So we're glad to have you with us again today, and glad to be able to share another example of these things that surround us, these events and these artifacts and these geological remnants that indicate to us that the events that were described in the Bible, that they actually happen, that they're true, and all things testify of Christ. See you next time.